Please welcome Kelley and Ken.
Thank you. Oh, is my mic up? It is. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Nobody ever complains about my voice carrying anyway, so it doesn't really much matter. Welcome, and thank you for joining this session. I'm really excited. He did tell me that was going to happen. I'm really excited to share this story and have Ken here partnering with me to share this story. It is probably one of the proudest projects and best accomplishments in my career. And in fact, next year is my 32nd anniversary. So yeah, I can't believe it. It does not feel like I've been there for 32 years. So let me tell you quickly a little bit about myself and how I ended up in the learning space, because the majority of my career was spent in technology. I won't repeat what he already shared, but I ended up in the learning space as an interim role. And then learning, just the importance of learning blew up at Travelers. And so there's a significant focus in our company on making sure that we're investing in our people and upskilling our workforce. And so I decided just to stay there. So today I'm going to share with you the story and our experience for our software engineering boot camp. I will walk you through what we did, what they learned, how we selected participants, lessons learned, lots of good stuff. So at a very high level, we had 20 apprentices, that's what we called them. We had 17 weeks of training followed by an 11-week apprenticeship with Coach Ken. We also had 8 new technologies this cohort learned, and then with 2 coaches. So a total of 20 and 2 coaches. So what was the problem we were trying to solve? Well, Claim went through a digital transformation of sorts, and they had a lot of advancements in their technology and their analytics, which streamlined the claim process significantly. And so they had many employees that ended up with capacity, but we didn't want it, in a lot of cases, companies would lay them off, but we did not want to lose our high-performing employees, so we redeployed them. And in some cases, they were redeployed within other parts of the business, so workers' comp, business insurance. And then we said, we know we have a lot of openings in technology, so how can we maybe redeploy some of the employees out of the business into technology? And so we were curious at first. Nope. We needed to see, is there going to be interest? And there was a lot of interest. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the selection process. So before I move on, does anybody know how much it might cost you in 6 months to replace an employee? $250,000 in 6 months. That's if you're bringing them in from outside. That is according to the SHRM report.
And that, you said that's for someone that's earning $100,000.
Yes.
Right, which would be, generally, that's going to be around your average salary for your mid-level software engineers.
Right, so think about your software engineers. Then the Wharton School of Business says external hires get paid 18% more than in your internal hires, but in the first 2 years, they perform worse than your internal hires in the same job. And then finally, in the Harvard Business Review, outside hires take 3 years to earn more than internal hires in the same job, but it takes internal hires 7 years to make the same amount as those external hires.
And if I could add one thing to what you're kind of putting together, and even aligned with the last slide, when we start talking about, as organizations move forward, if we think about the pandemic, right? Organizations were moving in one particular direction, then all of a sudden the pandemic hit. Now all of a sudden you've got to redeploy and move individuals to different areas. Most organizations are not set up because we have individuals that are silos. This is the only thing that you do. This is the only thing that you do. And when you're looking at something like this, as different challenges hit the organization, and we talk about agility, at its core, individuals being able to say, rather than focus in this area, let me take my skills and apply them in this area. That's at the core of kind of what we talk about in those areas.
Yep. So, our selection process. We had a call to action. We had a business problem to solve. We did an event, a couple of meetings that were a day in the life of a software engineer. And we marketed this out mostly to Claim, but also our operations group, in business insurance, and some other pockets of the company. 500 people showed up to those day in the life of a software engineer to learn what this was all about, is this something they wanted to embark on, because we were very clear with them it was not going to be an easy journey. We had 275 people actually applied for the job, so we created a whole new job posting specifically for boot camp. 275 applied, but they didn't just have to submit resumes. They also had to write an essay and make the case for why they should be part of the boot camp. Interestingly enough, many of the people that actually applied just already had a passion for technology. They were just doing it outside of the company. Or they were doing like open source projects. They were dabbling in it. Many of them actually had college degrees in some form of either computer science or management information systems. Within 2 months, and I'll talk a little bit about the village it took to get this process done in 2 months, we selected 20 participants. And I'll talk a little bit more later about some of the outcomes, but I'm happy and proud to say that 100% graduated the boot camp.
I have to say, yay!
Yeah.
Which in this style is most organizations don't reach that level of the number of people that graduate, and you've got more news to share along these lines,
I
right?
do. It's a great success story. This is why it's one of my favorites to tell. Can you tell? Very passionate about it. So it took a village, and I literally mean it took a small village. 30 plus employees were involved with the planning and execution. Actually, some are actually in the room here with me. And then it took 2 very dedicated executive sponsors. So we had the CIO of Claim and the leader for our Claim business division. Our CIO was so invested, he attended every planning weekly meeting. And he made sure that if we ran into any barriers or needed any help, he was right there for us. 8 different areas were involved. So we had folks from HR, talent acquisition, my learning team, software subject matter experts in software engineering, and some other in technology leaders. We had 18 hiring managers. So these 20 folks ended up with 16 different managers. And I'll talk a little bit more about what happened to them, what happened to some of them after. And then 4 lines of business. So, and I think the other thing that I want to share with you that was also important, besides our 2 executive sponsors, were our field staff. So most of these participants that were applying were coming out of our Claim field offices. And the leaders within the Claim field offices often were so involved in encouraging their employees to apply. So you had leadership buy-in in all parts of the organization, and they encouraged some folks to apply that would not probably otherwise have applied.
And I'd also add that one of the benefits that you get from that broad coalition of individuals is, as we went through that boot camp, we would encounter different problems, whether they're technical problems, scheduling problems, any number of different things. But with that type of buy-in, we could literally send a message, and that afternoon things got resolved, because everyone had really taken ownership for resolving things. So if it's like, oh, it's for the boot camp, great. And we'd find things get resolved really, really quickly.
So what did they learn and how did they learn it? We based the boot camp on MERNStack. It was probably our most common denominator tech stack. It's also the easiest point of entry for somebody who's not technical. We incorporated agile practices and concepts within the boot camp. In fact, within 3 weeks, the participants were running the ceremonies on their own. And we took it's all travelers contextual, so how we do our agile ceremonies, and we built it on that. We had engineering best practices that some of the subject matter experts came in and shared with the participants. So they had that all in line and could apply some of those best practices right as they were going through the boot camp. Towards the middle end of the boot camp, the coaches split the teams up into smaller, like 2 pizza box teams, right? And they self-organized. They said, you have to get into teams. We don't care how you organize. So they were self-organizing.
Which was actually extremely interesting. Because up to this point, like, they've been working together. So we said, we're going to break you off into these small teams. You're going to work in these small groups. And I got nasty grams. I got my boss, like, hey, I need to talk to you. Some of the students are upset. They're kind of saying you're forcing them to work in these small groups. And what's interesting is, one of the things that's behind that is, when it comes to learning, that's when individuals are at their most vulnerable. When I have to admit I don't know anything, and that's really difficult, particularly for older, or I wouldn't even say older, people that are above 18, right, to kind of say, hey, I don't know this particular thing. And these were individuals that had excelled in the areas that they were in. So you take these individuals who had excelled and you give them something where now all of a sudden I am not an expert and I don't really know anything. Large level of frustration, and there's some degree of imposter syndrome. I want to hide out. So for the first week, upset, couldn't stand it. After a week, hey, we're going to break your groups up. Now that's when they brought out the pitchforks. They're like, no, we're going to stay with our team. So it was extremely valuable to get them working. And the other thing I'll say about that is, it also increases the learning because one of the things that we found is if they were in groups. And as we coach and teach them, if I say something to a group of 4 or 5, as they work throughout the rest of the week, they're constantly repeating that to each other, but also repeating it in such a way that they can all understand. So it really deepened the learning.
Yep. So some other points about what happened during the boot camp is a lot of them commented how they learned how to learn again. It was something they hadn't been doing. And I think that was super important because some of these folks didn't even end up in a team that was working on MERN or what they were taught in the boot camp. They actually went into teams where they were doing .NET, Java, or C, and they were like, I'm in this groove of learning, and they were able to support, they were able to successfully do this. And happy to say, as an outcome, all of them are still with Travelers, too. So that's another exciting thing. And then the 11-week apprenticeship was also critical because instead of going straight into the teams and not having any continuity, Ken stayed on as their coach so that there was a bit of a transition. Because in some cases, the teams were really good at mentoring and supporting them. Other times, the teams might have had a release, and so they were like, not now, right? And so they were able to help, Ken was able to stay on and help them navigate some of those situations. So that was really important.
And to add to that, if you think about new hires, the interesting thing is that's what they absolutely deal with. Whether we acknowledge it or not, they go through the ups and the downs, the left, the right, and trying to figure out how do I stay productive? How do I still contribute? How do I be a part of the team when the team is extremely busy doing something? So that was, I thought, really helpful and valuable, even as a coach, to be able to see that.
Yep. And I swear I could talk about this boot camp for 2 hours. So I'm trying to get the most key points out here, but it was so exciting and so rewarding. So what was the outcome? This is why I'm so excited. I already shared that 100% graduated. 17 of the 20 were actually promoted in less than a year from graduating from the boot camp. A couple of them actually went back to the business because they thought it was a better fit. However, they ended up in the business, but in a role that was a little bit more technology focused. So they were able to take those tech skills and still move on. We did confirm our hypothesis that this model would work. And I'll share a little bit on what's next. But that was one of the reasons why we did this, too. We wanted to test and learn. Hey, how can this model be applied more broadly? And we proved it worked. All right, so there's always lessons learned with these types of things. Consider the timing. We ran the boot camp and started it on January 4th. I don't recommend doing that anymore. was not really a smart choice to do that. Consider your holidays, build in breaks. Our participants actually started to get a little bit burnt out. It's a very intense journey to go through. You're learning 40 hours a day. These folks, they basically moved out of the business and they did not do this off the side of their desk. This was full-time learning. And definitely towards the end, we actually extended the boot camp and said, you all need to take some PTO. So we sort of made sure that they took it. Some were really nervous because they didn't want to fall behind. And so we really had to push them to take their time off.
Which is interesting, because I would imagine that everybody else can relate to that, right? You're supposed to go on vacation, but you got this big thing coming up. How do I navigate this and figure this thing out? So it was actually kind of cool to work with them in the boot camp to begin to figure that stuff out, as opposed to when they get in their jobs.
Right. Be flexible. The coaches did a lot of ad-libbing so we built this curriculum, we had it all scheduled, but sometimes sometimes the participants would either fall behind or get ahead, and so the coaches had to adjust based on what was going on with the participants. In some cases, participants paired with others, so if they were stronger, they matched up with somebody who was struggling. Then we also, towards the end, which was really exciting and made the boot camp really neat, was, so we used Treehouse. We used Treehouse as a content provider. So we bought content because a lot of this stuff is out there. And so the coaches really focused on the coaching and the hands-on, which was incredibly important. Towards the end, they actually created new projects that weren't part of what we were planning. And in their pizza teams, they had to actually work on the same code base. So they were going to get a more lifelike experience than just going and submitting an individual project. So they had to work on their user stories. They had to work on the same, break it down in small chunks, and then merge their code so they knew what it was really like to be an engineer on a team.
And if I could add to that too,
Sure.
We talk about technical agility and the ability for groups to be able to work together and to forward a common code base. And what's really neat is, rather than talk about it theoretically, they had an opportunity to actually experience it and talk through all the things that made a difference when it came to communicating, having common standards among teams. But they really got that experience really early on, so that when they went into their teams, they had that experience. And most times when individuals go to boot camps, you get new projects, right? Hey, here's a new project. That's what most of them, the curriculum provides. So it's nice to be able to provide something that from the outset says, hey, you're going to have to deal with legacy code, because that's primarily what they're going to do when they get into their actual roles.
Yep. Finally, the other lesson that we learned, and we will make sure we change this about our process, is assigning your managers and teams early. It was really late in the game, and it was probably the number one question we got from the participants is, where am I going? What's the team working like? And it was a source of anxiety, actually, for them sometimes. And so even for the managers, we should have really brought them in sooner so that they understood what they were learning. And then they could also go, we could have built into the curriculum them going to their teams throughout the boot camp, getting to know their managers, getting to know their teams. So that was one of our biggest takeaways.
And from a cultural standpoint, to kind of piggyback on this, if you think about moving from the business where much of the work that they do is what's the word I'm looking for? It's scripted. Like they're told, here are the things that you need to do, here's how you need to operate. So their time blocks are prescribed. When you move into software engineering, it's a whole different paradigm. So for them, they had to begin to be responsible, manage their own time, begin to understand what things were important, what things were not important. So knowing where they were going to go for them helped them to be able to incorporate, what do I need to learn, as opposed to waiting till I get to day one. So that was actually kind of a neat little thing to see them becoming aware of those types of things.
Yeah, so what did the participants think? So I promise I will not read all these quotes, but I just want to highlight a few things. Coach Ken stretched us to achieve more than we would have done on our own. Now I have this opportunity that I didn't have, a career opportunity that is both interesting and exciting. Surreal experience, opportunity to switch gears, and we were well supported along the way. And finally, this is actually my funny one that I will read, is I was asking for help, and they asked me, is it just vanilla JavaScript? And she said, I don't know if it's vanilla, strawberry, or chocolate. And after she started to learn it, she now knows what vanilla JavaScript is, and she's really come along far way.
TypeScript.
Yep. So what are we doing going forward? So we learned a lot from this experience. One of the things we learned is that we had to take a pause of getting non-tech to tech, because we would risk flooding our teams with all junior developers. And that would be a strain on our existing software engineers. And what we found with this experience and another one we've done that we're calling immersive learning experiences, which is boot camp style, what we found is the people on the teams that are already there, they're like, well, what about us? You know, they're coming out of this boot camp learning all these new technologies and things that we don't even know. And so now what we're focusing on now is switching gears to our mid-level engineers and upskilling them to sort of move the pipeline to the right. And then we'll look at non-tech to tech. Because as you saw by the cost, we actually have folks that are very interested in, and I get emails all the time, when are you doing the next boot camp? When's the next boot camp? And so now we're talking about a project to try and figure out how we scale non-tech to tech and hire within. Because the business value that they're bringing to those technology teams is super valuable, and you can't really put a price on it. And so when they joined the teams, there was like two-way mentoring, right? The new developers, while they were being coached on coding, well, they were able to contribute business value right away, because oftentimes they were in a team that was, you know, enhancing a system they actually worked on in their day-to-day lives as an end user. So now we have time for some questions, and we'll do a little fireside chat. Ken, you want to get started? Anybody have any questions? Okay, he's going to bring a mic over to you.
How long did it take you to put together your boot camp program?
I want to say it took about 3 months, 4 months, and that included our bidding. We went to bid for it. So, but again, it took a village. The reason why we were able to do it so relatively fast was because we had such an army behind it to help plan and execute.
I imagine something like this has some risk built into it. So how did you get your decision makers to say, yep, we're willing to take on this risk, knowing that it could fail?
Well, we're very keen on investing in our employees, and we had a lot. The leaders did not want to lay anybody off, and I'm happy to say, due to that automation and that disruption in the claim process, a positive disruption that streamlined the whole claim handling process, they redeployed, and then in this, we had a lot of openings in technology. And so it was solving multiple problems, you know, investing in our people, not wanting to let them go, the business knowledge that they were bringing, and it was well worth the investment. Because as I mentioned, that business value they bring to the team, and you saw the cost of bringing in external hires, the cost is much higher to not do something like this.
So for the cohort of 20, right, like just by the calculations, that would have been $5 million.
How did you deal with compensation? Was there some sort of normalization, or how did you switch from role to role and keep that so as they were switching from like the business side to technology, it was evened out or across that many people?
It's a great question. So we focused our marketing to people who were sort of already at the same level as they would be coming into the boot camp. And that helped. Now, this was life-changing for a lot of these participants because their earning potential in the tech organization is going to far out exceed what they could have gotten in the business. So, I wouldn't even call it a step backwards. It was aligned to where they already were. And yes, we did pay their salaries during the whole time.
And let me add one thing. That was really important because we also talk about the graduation rates for individuals that go through boot camps, and it can really go down. And one of the big factors that factors into that is if individuals have to spend additional time doing things outside of the boot camp, it becomes extremely difficult. So giving them the opportunity to do that full time, and even to some extent, supporting them in how they manage their hours. Great, I know you want to spend 24 hours doing all this, but let's work on trying to minimize that.
He's right there.
You mentioned you're going to start, or have you started the upskilling your existing developers? Have you started something like that already?
Where we're at right now is identifying the critical skills so we can build the program. And we haven't started building it yet. We actually just started the planning for it. Our goal is to have our first cohort go through in January.
What kind of challenges or risk that you may have, or you're thinking, or you're having right now?
Well, I know some people say, are you afraid to upskill your employees and then they're just going to leave, right? So that's always cited as a risk. But as Henry Ford said, I'm the block on the quote, but basically more worried about training and having them leave than not training them and having them stay, right? So and then it's a way to better engage your employees too. So the engagement level goes up. Like I said, all our participants are still here are still at Travelers.
Hey, so while they were in the boot camp, did you do anything with individuals to kind of prime the pump around learning being a kind of career-long continuous activity? I know, this is a softball for you, Ken. I know, dude.
Thank you, David.
It's important, yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, and I think I mentioned it before. One of the critical things I learned through this was learning to learn. And that software engineering, you're constantly solving problems. They now knew how to go to Stack Overflow. They knew how to use our resources internally. And so you're always learning. And we actually, what we call our learning is continuous, right? So we're building a learning culture and making sure people understand that learning is going to be rewarded and not learning will have its consequences.
Yeah, and as a coach participating in that, that is actually one of the greatest joys about coaching in an environment like that, because as individuals operate, if we just think about how the Agile process itself, where we do this retrospection, begin to look back, but it's the thing most of us don't do, especially when we're in an environment like that, and we want to run, and let me get this thing done. And being able to take a look and help them to begin to see, here are the models by which you learn. Have you noticed that you learn more when you actually work in this collaborative environment versus when you try to just read it? And saying, hey, those are different types of strategies that you can employ, and seeing them over time begin to learn things. Like there would even be moments where, as we're going through inside the coaching, we can say, hey, and point to something that's completely out of their view. And when they see that, have them write that down, just like an author has a trail, so do engineers and how they develop. You can actually look at it and say, I know who wrote this, right? helping them to begin to understand that so that they could put their own lists together as they're going through things to see, where do I struggle? Where do I fall down? What's a strategy that I can use to get that? To that point allows them, once they get out of it, I was telling Kelley, I was talking with some of them and like, yeah, we're not using any of the stuff or technologies that we learned. And they're just nonchalant about it. And keep in mind, 11 weeks ago, these people were freaked out, right?
Yeah.
You'd say, hey, you're going to do this, and it would just be this huge level of anxiety. And to no longer see that anxiety, yeah, it'll get figured out. I learned it. It's someone who's begun to understand I have strategies for how I can figure all these things out.
I think I'm next.
Oh, go ahead, Laura.
Hi, Kelley.
Hi, Laura.
So knowing a little bit about what you guys did, are you seeing you have a lot of other learning opportunities available for people, online learning, other classes? Are you seeing that the participants are taking advantage of other things that you have available to a higher degree than maybe other people are? Or about the same, or have you noticed any continued learning with things that you already have available at the company?
So yes, and it helps that we've been doing some focus campaigns around learning. So we're a Pluralsight subscriber. I don't know if you all know what Pluralsight is. It's sort of the leading content provider in technology. And we've done some campaigns, and we've taken a look at, we didn't really look at the data, but we do know there's definitely an increase in activity. As well as, we have a platform, I don't know if you're all familiar with Degreed. So it's sort of our front door. It's a learning experience platform. And we have done campaigns around that to raise adoption. So.
So Travelers is a pretty big company. Do you have any recommendations or insights to smaller companies trying to adopt something like this?
Well, I think it's worth, regardless of what the size of the company is. It does take some upfront investment. You have to be willing to invest. But it's worth it because the knowledge that your internal hires bring to the table, that's business knowledge, you can't really put a price tag on that. And I think there have been also programs similar to this that have been shared on LinkedIn. So a lot of companies are doing models like this.
And just to piggyback on that, one of the things, the environment that we're all dealing with is that we have dwindling resources when it comes to engineers, right? Software engineers. And that's only going to get worse. It's not like it's going to get better. The more innovation we have, the more we're going to be dependent upon that, the more demand that it will create. Meanwhile, we're not really producing that level. So being able for smaller organizations having some system in place that allows them to be able to redeploy or move individuals from different skill sets to different skill sets becomes extremely valuable, right? Because as things begin to fluctuate, knowing that I don't have to be a complete expert in this particular area. But if I can be 70% of the way there, 75, 80% of the way there, right? Well, now all of a sudden I can lighten the burden on the engineers and take some of that off. So now all of a sudden those organizations become a lot more flexible.
I'm going to cheat and ask two questions. As a follow-up to hers, do you think you could have done what you did to the extent you did to engage more external resources rather than internal? And what was the pull for the participants? Were they voluntold? Was there something promised to them? What was in it for them to engage in this?
So they all showed a desire to want to switch careers. And it, like I mentioned, they were savvy enough, or they were doing technical work. Some were like SharePoint, they were getting more technical even in their current roles, and they had a interest.
Clarification, for the people doing the instructing, not the people receiving the instruction.
Oh, okay, sorry. So here's the instructor. And and we are looking. We have some employees that actually teach outside of the company, and so one of the things when we do these some of the immersive experiences we're going to be rolling out, we're going to see if we can even source and build coaches, engineering coaches internally. And some people just have a passion for it, so we have to seek out the people who are already demonstrating, they have a desire to do it, and they want to do it. It's a way of increasing engagement.
And I'll just say, as one of the coaches, and I'm not sure I completely heard the question, was it, what's the motivation in participating in something like that? Something like this nature?
The motivation is you had a list of internal people that were involved, not necessarily doing the teaching, but involved.
Yep.
What was the pull for them to get involved in helping make this work?
So some of the folks were actually, we have a pretty sizable learning organization at Travelers. And so some of them were very interested in learning from this experience to see how they might apply something like this, even in non-technical areas. So for them, it was a lot about learning. And honestly, we take care of our employees. That's the one thing I can say at Travelers we do. And so that was just, that cultural value aligned with what we were doing. And they wanted to be a part of it.
And I'll just add, it is an energizing experience to participate in something like that, really for everyone that's involved. When we had the final session, you could see the pride that everyone had, from the CIO all the way down, in being able to produce that, even if I just sent a flyer out or did anything, right, to move this thing along. And it kind of goes back to the keynote, what we talk about when we go to work. We want those intrinsic motivators that have it like, I just want to show up. And this type of a program is something that really energizes really the entire organization.
Yeah, I can honestly say that everybody was really proud to be part of it. And in fact, we had a little graduation ceremony, and our CTO and our CEO both joined the graduation. So it was really living our cultural value of taking care. Great question. So, like I said, we're just starting out. We just did a pilot program for our campus talent. So a lot of kids coming out of college, and we did a program with them. And again, even with that program, when they went into their teams, we had our mid-level engineers going, well, wait a minute, what about us? And so we absolutely know that there's a desire that people want. We haven't gotten quite to the workforce planning piece of it yet. We're just trying to build the structure and pilot it first, do test and learn. And then once we know that that model proves out, we will work for it. But our learning team actually partners with some of the folks that are actually here, where we're understanding what are your skill gaps within your organization and how many do you need. And so some of that workforce planning is actually going on. Ken, you don't get that.
Ken, how did you manage participants that were maybe struggling or working at different paces during the 11-week program?
Love it. So one of the things that Kelley mentioned was that we used Treehouse. So having been a veteran of teaching boot camps, a lot of times when you're teaching large groups, you're not able to give that one-on-one attention, and you have to kind of coach at or train at a particular level, and kind of hope everybody gets there. But with this type of a model, where they could do the on-demand learning through Treehouse, it really allowed Dave and I to focus week by week and look at, all right, well, who's falling behind? What are the things that they're struggling with? So we could sit down and have one-on-one sessions. And that's where we begin to get into the things of, all right, let's look at the models that they use to represent information, and what are the things that we can give to them to give them other additional models so that they can begin to learn. But in addition to that, we can also begin to see where there are clusters or things that maybe the entire group is not understanding. So that's where we're able to put together those ad hoc courses or just little things. And I think a lot of that learning is foundational. So meaning you've got to have one level before you move to the next level. So being able to focus on that, we could ensure that they had a good level, piece by piece, whether it be in individual sessions, whether it be in group sessions, or however we facilitated it, we could ensure that step by step they were all putting that level in.
Any other questions?
Oh, okay.
Oh, there you are.
Hi. What was the mitigation strategy for the groups where these 20 people came out of? And how much support did you have from those teams, and how did they handle the vacancies that were left?
Well, the thing was that, as I had mentioned, the technology advancements and the advancements in analytics freed up a lot of people to the point where, in some cases, you know, if you look at it, some companies might have laid off. So but we didn't lay anybody off. We redeployed everybody, and then this was just one of the paths for redeployment. So they didn't really have to fill vacancies. And our field staff, our leadership in the field, was very supportive, and like in some cases would be identifying individuals and encouraging them to apply, because they might not have otherwise applied themselves. So it was a good problem to have. So.
We are about at time.
Okay.
So I would maybe you were gonna.
Well, I'll just add one other final thing. One of the things that you mentioned was kind of like, hey, what's the litmus what do we apply to figure out who gets in the program? And one of the things that we talked about and we found was like grit and determination, and looking at how people display that. And you know, in the modern way that many individuals will hire, we may look at their resumes, we may look at what's the criteria by which we judge those things. And what we kind of said was, let's begin to pay attention to how persistent they are. And we found that model really worked because people were able to stick with it, because they're not going to know anything. They are not going to know anything, and they're going to feel clueless for a while. But if they've got the desire and the motivation to stick it out, we can see them over the hump. I don't know.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Probably time for one more.
Lots of great questions. Okay. Well, thank you.
Congratulations.